Kia ora all, and welcome to the Huddy Hui for episode 8. As always, Adam Julian is here with me in the studio, and of course, it is exciting news. It is level 1. Level 1, Adam. And what does that mean?
It means rugby on Saturday. It means the opening up of society, and it means we can touch and hug each other again.
That's right. So been missing those handshakes, and really looking forward to seeing some pre-season rugby out there this upcoming few weeks. We're going to be doing a bit of a grand tour across Wellington on Saturday, aren't we, Adam?
There's a smorgasbord of fixtures, and we'll run through some of those later on the program.
But first up is our guest for tonight. This man is a legendary figure when it comes to women's rugby. He's also coached Samoa and Counties Manukau, but his achievements are best noted for coaching the Black Ferns, and he took them to their first 2 World Cups in 1998 and 2002, and he is largely responsible for the culture within and enduring success of the Black Ferns. Kia ora, Darryl Suasua. Thank you very much for coming on the Huddy Hui tonight. The first question I'm going to ask you, Darryl, is 10 years ago, when New Zealand Rugby had a financial restructure, the women's NPC was cut. That hasn't happened this time with COVID-19. We've seen the Heartland Championship and the Under-19 Championship get cut. What's your thoughts on that?
No, I think it's, I guess it's evolution, progress. Probably a few years back, there was, how they changed everything to the Wharapama Cup. I think it was part of a strategic plan with New Zealand Rugby just to step up that women's area. And I think back to when they sort of employed some staff at New Zealand Rugby to look after the women's game. And obviously that became the biggest growth area in the game and has been for a few years now. And so probably to sort of cut that part off would have been, probably wouldn't have gone down too well.
How did you become involved in women's rugby, and why almost 3 decades ago when it was almost invisible?
Yeah, I had at my club at Auckland Marist, we had a women's team, and I was actually just helping out with, I was playing and coaching, and I was a PE student at the time, and I got a little bit of a job as I guess they call them RDOs today. And one of the roles there was to get around and help all the teams. And I ended up coaching going down and helping the women's team a few times. And what happened is I was probably never home. And at that stage, I was at training one night, and I saw my car come in the driveway, and I thought, shucks, that's strange. Something must have happened at home. And next thing after training, I went to look for my partner, find out where she was, see what was going on. And she was down there running around with the women's team. So I ended up sort of going and helping, because they actually played on Sundays in those days. And so it didn't actually clash with the men's rugby. So I ended up helping out with the coach. It was actually myself and Mike Casey. And we were helping them out and coaching them on the Sundays. And then Bruce Robertson, who was working at Auckland Rugby at the time, asked me if I could just help out with the Auckland team. So they had their coaches, but what they wanted was like these, what they call coaching coordinators. They said if they used to put one of the Auckland staff with each one of the teams. So because he knew I'd been coaching the women's team, he says, could you just tag along and see if the Auckland women's team needs anything? So it sort of went on from there, really. And then when the New Zealand role came up, I got contacted by Lee Smith, who was working at New Zealand Rugby, asked if I'd like to put my name forward for that. So I did, and I didn't actually get the job initially. But in 2005, they asked if I'd help out with the coaching. There was already a coach appointed. And in 2006, they offered me the head role there.
And so take us back to the early days of women's rugby, Darryl. I don't think people appreciate just how small and backward this was. The first World Cup in 1991 wasn't officially sanctioned. New Zealand didn't go to the next one in 1994. And all of a sudden, you're in charge of the national team.
Yeah. I think in 94, so New Zealand Rugby sort of decided they were going to take an interest in 1992. and they started running, like a coaching school down in Wellington at the police college there, and players were brought in each year, and Laurie O'Reilly was the coach at that stage. And then they'd sort of pick and I think in 92, they picked like a team that then played against the New Zealand Presidents 15. Then in 93, I think it might have been, or actually, I'm not too sure on the exact dates, but they had a tour and they played. They came up and played Auckland. Laurie brought a team up to play Auckland. And then by 1994, they had their first overseas tour that was sanctioned by New Zealand Rugby, and that was to Australia. So that was in place of that World Cup. So whereby teams were paying their own way to get to the World Cup, New Zealand Rugby decided they'd send a team over to Australia instead. So they did an Australian tour there, and then in '95 Australia came back. An amazing game. It was meant to be a curtain raiser on Eden Park, and because it was wet, they got sent to a unmarked field out at Waitemata Stadium with the grass up to about their knees and a real mud bath there. So they got sent out there, and then the following year, '96, when I got the role, there was a tour of Australia, then followed by the tour of North America. So it just started to grow from that point on.
Tell us about your training regimes with the Black Ferns, Darryl. We know that Gordon Titchens was pretty tough, and you were pretty tough yourself when it came to the training regimes of the Black Ferns.
Oh, yeah. I think it's all perception, really. When you had a lot of the girls, what they were doing at club level, it was a little bit different, So in a lot of cases, they went straight from club to international rugby. So just being a little bit organised and keeping everybody moving for a whole training was probably something they might not have expected. And probably the most brutal part of it was between tours, when they had to do their own training. And we used to run once a month, leading up to World Cup. Once a month, we had a full-day camp. We brought them all in, which had fitness blocks, it had skills blocks and all that. And, that got pretty heavy, I guess. But again, as I say, it was if they were doing all their work and their workload was gradually building up to that, and I always thought it shouldn't be a problem.
What is the difference between coaching males and females, and why did the woman that you coached in the Black Ferns between 96 and 2002 embrace this hardline fitness so enthusiastically?
Well, in my opinion, when you're coaching men's, women's rugby, it's just rugby. You're just coaching rugby. But if I'm really honest, my experience with the woman is a lot of the women were just more intelligent than the blokes, to be frank. A lot of guys that were chasing the rugby dream, they're straight out of school into academies and they're doing rugby's their thing. They don't have a plan B. Whereas the woman, the woman I was coaching, they realised that. If they play this game, there was no other women's sport where they're going to get paid to travel all around the world to do these amazing, incredible things with their lives. They weren't planning on traveling through Europe or through the States and all this sort of stuff and someone else paying for it. Not only that, they get a decent daily allowance plus, a whole wardrobe full of kit from Canterbury in the early days or Adidas. And I think the girls appreciated the benefits of that. And as I say, the girls, when they started playing rugby, they already had careers. I had, lawyers, I had physiotherapists, teachers, I had people that own their own businesses. A lot of them were pretty switched on, and as I say, as opposed to the boys, a lot of the guys that I've coached in the past, they'd left school straight into academies and all they were going to be was rugby players.
And tell us about some of the personalities that were involved in that initial period, 1996 to 1998, which culminated in the World Cup success. Some of these women are household names now.
Yeah, well, in our time, probably people didn't know too much about the women's game. And it's quite funny because I remember 1998 and, Radio Sport, for example, it wasn't been going for so long. And I got a call from Martin Devlin. And back in those days, he just started talking to me and then he was getting all excited, asked me these stupid questions as, do they play like the men? Do they, what about, they're getting knocked in the breast region and do you go into the changing rooms and these silly sorts of things. And then it's so amazing when I hear him in 2019 just praising the Black Ferns and the women's Black Ferns sevens and all that sort of stuff. It's just been a big turnaround. So back in those days, it was really, really different. So I don't know if they were household names, but for our girls, that really didn't matter. It was about really having the opportunity to wear the same jersey that people like Colin Meads and you know, all the greats you'd always heard about. And I guess for us, you know, every little boy that's growing up in New Zealand, they want to wear a black jersey, you know, that it's a dream. And for the girls, suddenly they had the chance to wear a black jersey. It was a genuine black jersey with the silver fern on, and the New Zealand Rugby Union, that body was actually paying for it, you know. And if they were playing touch, netball, a lot of other teams, sports in New Zealand, they're still fundraising to get there. Whereas they were now playing for this national body, this incredible union. It was just, if you're wearing a black jersey, we're going to support you. And I think, as I said, it didn't matter who knew them or who didn't. They were going to do their best for the jersey.
Tell us about the 98 World Cup, Darryl, the Black Ferns' first ever World Cup. Tell us the preparation that was involved for the tournament, and what were some of the key themes that you, as a coach, put on the players during that World Cup?
Yeah, well, the biggest thing was that it really started, I guess, in 96. So probably the biggest thing that we did that was a little bit, I guess, was a little bit different. We went real down that fitness line. So we needed to be athletes. And for me, a lot of the selection was based around finding the best athletes and then trying to find positions for them. So, you know, we had a player, probably the best player I still think to wear the jersey was Monique Kuruvana, who was initially was at fullback, but we had Anna Richards, who was a halfback, and she was an incredible player as well. So to get both of them playing in those key positions, I you know, moved Anna out to 10. Now, initially she wasn't too happy about that. She wanted to protect the turf, but, you know, she went out there, she went well. Wayne Smith worked with me in 1997. And he pointed I brought a girl down there. I knew she was a good footballer. I just didn't know what position. So we brought her down to one of the training camps, and Wayne looked at her and he just said to me, "You've got to put that girl in somewhere you'll build your whole back line around her in the future." And that was Susie Shortland. And she certainly became one of the key players. There were people like Louisa Wall, who was an absolute, you know, she's a great athlete. She'd been to the World Cup with the Silver Ferns. She was big, aggressive and fast, and you know, we sort of had to look at a few positions, but in the end we ended up with her on the wing, and she was almost unstoppable, you know, out there. Vanessa Coots was one who I'd seen playing, well, it would have been in the early 90s, I think, and I'd never seen her play since. I'd seen her at touch tournaments, and as soon as I got the role, I tracked her down to see where she was, to see if she wanted to come back and play rugby. And eventually we sort of got back into the rugby thing. So yeah, there were a lot of really good persons. Probably one of the biggest personalities for me was Leonardine Simpson-Brown, who was my first captain, and you know, she helped put a lot of things in place, like getting the haka presented to the team properly. There was things like the songs, helping me out with things like you know, getting all the girls on board with nutrition, the training regimes, and that. So I guess the other thing to be mindful of is in 96, I went away as the coach. So there was one coach, 26 players, and manager Leo Walsh, who was from the he was on the board at the time. So that's pretty much how it was. So to go away by myself really needed the help with you know, of people like Leonardine to help get me through.
And that 1998 World Cup win only featured the concession of one try. Vanessa Coots, who you mentioned, got 5 by herself in the final. Germany was beaten 134-6. These women were universally acclaimed, even by Stephen Jones, that stodgy old critic. How did the perception of the women's game change after that success, and how much of a role has that played in, I guess, promoting and preserving this Black Ferns legacy?
Yeah, look, I think the important thing is, you know, prior to me getting involved, there was a there was a 60 minutes special on TV about the Massey Rams, I think it was. It was all about women's rugby, and it was this thing about women are starting to play rugby, blah, blah, blah. And it probably showed all the negative sides of the game. So people had this perception. So one of the key things and agendas for me was, and for our leadership group, was we needed to change the perception. It's fair to say that back in those days, all we had to do was give the administration an excuse to get rid of women's rugby and they would have been gone. So, things about, being fiercely competitive, aggressive, like rugby players on the field, but, well-behaved, feminine, and that off the field. So things like Melody Robinson, she had a background as a model and all that sort of stuff, into the clothes fashion. So I had a chat to her about, what should our number ones look like? How should we dress? And she designed stuff and had all that sort of stuff made up. We used to get given, so say from 96, we'd sort of just get given all the men's leftover stuff. So like all the men's polo shirts, all big baggy stuff and, all that sort of stuff. And the number ones they got given to the girls, it was actually quite funny. They were so bad. I don't know who, you've heard the term stale male pale. It sounds like some of those decided, we'll dress the girls up like this and send them off. And when the girls played in, I can't remember what year it was, but at the end of the tour, they had a ceremonial burning of all their number ones. And they threw all the shoes in. The shoes of some brand was Scylla or something. So all the shoes went to the pool, then all the stuff was up, and they just chucked all their number ones, and they were so ugly. But as I say, when it came to 98, we wanted to do it right. I took some of the girls to have a look at the apparel and choose the stuff that they wanted, so that it was fitting. It was made for women. And then the other one was, obviously Melody had influence over what the number ones were looking like. And probably the best way I can describe it is when we arrived at the World Cup, there was an opening ceremony. And you see all the women's teams there, and the Black Ferns, or the New Zealand women's team as they were at the moment, they arrived. And they had these, from Canterbury, they had these massive puffer jackets, full length down to the ankles. It was pretty cold there. And the whole team, and it was like a black cloud just walking through the place, sort of like they'd arrived. And the other thing is, after the first game, everybody's at the aftermatch and all the girls come in, they're all sort of got their lovely number ones on, all perfectly attired. And it's like, holy heck, they look great on the field and they look amazing off it. And that's where, those were some of the comments that Stephen Jones started talking about. They were, unbelievable on the field and infinitely stylish off it. So, with those sorts of things. And the other one that was really important to us is Rob. Sorry, I'm just trying to think of the name. He was the chairman at the time.
Rob Fisher.
Rob Fisher was up at the World Cup. And, man, he was just so proud of the girls. He would just, he just thought they were amazing. And when we actually won the World Cup, he actually said to me, look, we've got to play close at home so people can see the team. And he was ringing Dave Moffat from the elevator as we were going up to the aftermatch, trying to tell him we need to get these girls into another game back home before the end of the year. And at that stage, they were able to organise a curtain raiser. They played against Australia. So by the time he got to the aftermatch, he was able to tell the girls, yep, we've got a curtain raiser against Australia. So it was just all taken off at that stage.
And you talked about any excuse to get rid of the Black Ferns, though. In 2001, after 10 years of unbeaten tests, there was a loss to England. Tell us about that loss and tell us how that changed the preparation for the 2002 World Cup, which was subsequently won as well.
Yeah, it was pretty, the loss, it was, to be honest, when we were told that England were coming down, I was a little bit, it was great that they were here. It was awesome. But from a team point of view, we just weren't ready to play. So England actually paid all their own way. In 2001, the year before the World Cup, there was no program for the Black Ferns at all. There was nothing. There was a nothing year. So when England said they'd come, we had, so I'm just getting my years mixed up. No, 2001, there was nothing planned. So when England decided they would pay their own way, come down and we played a 3-test series, two tests. You know, we had girls that had gone for off-season surgery and all that sort of stuff. So people like Anna Richards, she'd you know, key part of our team. She had to have a splint built for her hand. Played this, she just had surgery on her thumb. I think Regina Sheck had surgery on her knee, and we had to sort of rush her back to get her ready. And in New Zealand, I guess the key thing around that time, because it was early in the season, a lot of the girls weren't ready to play. So we had to sort of go with the squad that we'd had the year before, rather than say, right, you're not ready, let's pull the next one in, because the next one actually wasn't ready in 2001. We're leading into 2002, when we'd done a big build up over the off season. That would have been fine, but that 2001 year was a tough one. But the good thing about it is we managed to try a few new things. So one of the things I tried to do was tighten the game up a little bit, keep it a little bit tight in the forward. So I didn't think we had the legs to move it like we normally did. And that turned out to be really good for us, because when we went to the World Cup, basically our forwards became we're probably more dominant, more you know, the dominant feature in our game. In the past, it had been what the backs were doing. So it worked out pretty well. When come 2002, we just beat everybody up front, really.
And there was a famous story from the Palmerston North Rugby Institute before that tournament, the Rose, which was a metaphor for defeating England. Can you tell us that story? Because I want the viewers to understand the emotion and preparation behind this extraordinary moment where New Zealand won the World Cup without conceding a try. 4 years earlier, they won the World Cup conceding only one try, did even better in 2002, which is amazing.
Yeah, I think probably if I go back a little bit, in terms of preparation for the 2002, I had a number of people I sent out videos to. Okay, so they were just our game, and I asked them, you know, these were people that I really, really trusted and believed in, good coaches around New Zealand and that. I think, if I remember, I think Robbie Deans had a look at some stuff for us and a few other, you know, top coaches. And I said, how would you beat the Black Ferns? Send me a plan. So as opposition coach, what would you do to beat it? And everybody pointed towards our forwards. Weren't good enough, you know, they weren't physical enough. You know, the backs are good, but if you shut our backs down, we're going to be in trouble. There's probably a little bit of, you know, kicking stuff at the back. So when I got all that feedback back, one of the things for me is I you know, you get a little bit defensive and you go, no, our team, that's not us and that sort of stuff. But we tried to put something together that meant that if they saw our games after the World Cup, they couldn't say the same thing. So it meant we focused on those areas. So as we headed in towards the that last camp, it was just the team that had come in that had made it. So there's a lot of girls. We had about 100 girls working across the country. They were all trying to get the game plan right. They'd all done the fitness work. And unfortunately, we could only take the 26, I think it was, to the World Cup. So when they came in, I had a video made, and the video, it was messages from a lot of the girls that had gone to the first World Cup. There was a message from Leonardine Simpson-Brown that, you know, karanged them into the room. And what I did is I took all the lights out of the main lounge there. And I said to the girl, and shut all the blinds, so it was pretty dark in there. And I says, look, girls, we're meeting in the whatever room it was. And they all started making, when you hear them all going, what's going on with the guy says, where's the lights and all this sort of stuff. And then suddenly the big screen comes on, and it's you know, full wall with Leonardine Simpson-Brown doing the call, you know, karanga calling them on. And the girls try to find a seat, and on their seat we placed a rose on each seat. And when the video actually finished, it finished with had a shot of all the girls pretty much at the final trial that had probably missed out. And I guess the message just was that you know, all the people that are on that video from '98 from beyond, they're our people. And now, you know, if you're new in the team, you know, the thing was just wake up and smell the roses, you know, our people, that's us, that's you. And that's how we sort of moved it, tied that rose into it. And then from there, we went out and had our first training, which was just, it was probably the best training ever. You know, we designed the training so it was stuff they all knew. It was real simple, but it was fast, it was explosive. And that sort of set the tone for everything, really.
And that World Cup was won convincingly. You mentioned Monique Huravanara as the best player you ever coached. She was a halfback. She scored a try in that final. Kendra Coxedge is now a very prominent personality in the New Zealand game. She plays the same position. A lot of people would be surprised to hear somebody compared to being better than Kendra. How would you contrast Monique and Kendra?
It's hard because you're in different time, different times and that. But you know, Monique, there were a number of girls that are really good. I mean, there are a number of girls, you know, that I coach, and they're all good for different reasons and that. But see, Monique just seemed to be the complete player. I mean, when I used to train her, she just used to play with the men's team, men's premier team, train all week, full contact. That in the gym, she was the strongest. So she was a halfback, probably weighed about 62 kilos or something, not heavy, but just a ball of muscle. She was the strongest, stronger than any of the props. You know, she'd be repping out on, not a 1 rep max, but repping out on 80 Ks on the bench, a huge squat. She was just so powerful and close to the line. If she decided, you know, you get an 8, 9 to a 5 minutes, she's going to score every time. Just, you know, run through people. And the other thing was her defensive qualities, probably the biggest hitter. I mean, just being so much stronger than everyone else was huge. And, you know, when I compare it to the men's game, you know, her pass was as good as any pass you'd see at any guy in the country. You know, quite often you see this thing where at line-out time, ball comes off the top, halfback gets it and they hit 2. You know, he's getting a good quick one across the game line. Well, one of our good scoring moves with Monique would hit 3. She'd hit Annalia Rush out there in outside centre. Beautiful flat pass she's running onto, and it's pretty hard to stop someone close to the line when you get a ball like that. And, you know, I guess the true sense of how good she actually was is when we used to have the training school and that down at Police College, there were a lot of the men's coaches that had come from, you know, the NPC teams and that. And one of the guys that was here, the late Bernie Stewart, who was coaching Buller at the time, he was looking to see if he could get Monique to play in the 3rd division men's side, and it was actually turned down. So it was quite convincing. And the other one I think could easily have, the other 2 that I think could quite easily have played men's rugby, and they do a good job, would have been Lewis Awall, who was big and fast, and Vanessa Coots. I mean, if she was given space, I mean, no one's going to touch her. So we used to regularly train against under 85 teams. So they were probably, you know, I don't know if you've heard the term sparring up. So we wanted to play someone that was faster and probably a little, you know, stronger. So across the board, the average weight would have been heavier than us and that sort of stuff, even though they were 85s. And, you know, if Vanessa Coots got the ball outside, she'd skin any guy. You know, she was quick. And probably the only other player I've seen that could probably do that in the modern times would have been when I was doing the sevens. I hooked up men's teams to play against, and Carla Hohepa was similar, where she just absolutely cut some guys in half. So there was no difference in the physicality. She was another one that was like that. But that's why I'd suggest if you compare the 2, they are 2 different eras, Kendra and Monique. But if I look at Monique's game, her pass was solid off both hands, probably bigger than most guys. Her physicality, her defensive stuff, you wouldn't want to get hit by her. And there's not a lot of halfbacks you say, oh, you know, if you're going to run at someone, you might have to run at the halfback or the 10. You don't come down that channel. And then if she's running with the ball, you know, she'll drop a shoulder on you, doesn't matter who you are, and go straight to you. So plus, she was one of the quickest in the team. So, you know, probably a full pair. And the kicking game was one of her, I guess, her key strengths was her box kick. So she used to spend a lot of time on you know, the basic things.
It's interesting you mentioned about the New Zealand Sevens, Darryl. You were heavily involved in the origins of New Zealand Sevens. Could you tell our viewers about that, and also about the Wild Ducks within the Sevens program?
Well, first of all, I'll tell you how we got this name, the Wild Ducks, okay? Because it's an absolutely ridiculous name, and if anybody's listening, they go, what a ridiculous name. You're probably right. It is a ridiculous name. But I was sort of way back in those times. I also used to spend a fair bit of time coaching up in Japan, and what I got was was playing up there at NEC, and we had a group of friends. We used to go to this bar in a place called Kamioka, and all these fans, they wanted to play rugby, but they didn't have that structure where they could play rugby up there. So we said, well, how about we try and make a club team and organise some games? So we did that with a whole group of guys, and there were girls involved in that. So we made a team, but we needed a name. What could we call our club? And we're sitting in this bar, and there's this. It's quite a dim bar, and there was this big duck, and it had a light bulb in it, so it was glowing. So that was the light source in the room. And one guy goes, "Oh, Waldo Ducko, we beat Waldo Ducko," and that's how. We're the Wild Ducks. Yeah, okay, hey, Wild Ducks, cool. And then we had a guy it must have been friends of one of the guys who had a clothing company called Convert. So back in those days, Convert Rugby used to do boots, or used to do most of the gear for all the high schools, headgear and all this sort of stuff. So he came on board and sponsored the team. So when, and they had, they sold stuff throughout Asia. And the first Sevens tournament we wanted to go to was in Hong Kong. And I tried to put a case to New Zealand Rugby Union, but they weren't interested. And this was back in, I think, 97. And so what we did is we thought, okay, we'll fundraise, we'll get individual sponsors. And I got hold of the guy up in Japan to see if he would help us. And it just so happened, I said to him, oh, this is New Zealand version of Wild Ducks. We're also Wild Ducks. So with that, we matched the Wild Ducks with the group we had in Japan. And when we got up to Japan, the Wild Ducks Club, they all turned up in Hong Kong to watch them play. And all the equipment, all the gear and everything was, we're all supported by this clothing company there. And then after that, they actually flew all the girls over to Japan and looked after them, and the likes of Melody Robinson and that they did their clothing catalogs and all that sort of stuff in Japan. And they looked after us. We played a couple of tournaments up there as well. So that's how that all started off. And they did a few Hong Kong tournaments, a few Japan tournaments. And then I think it was about 2000 actually, when New Zealand Rugby Union decided, oh, we better have a New Zealand team. So basically, all the other countries we were playing against, there was England, the States, Canada, Hong Kong, even had an Australian team up there, but there was no New Zealand team. The best we could do was New Zealand Wild Ducks.
And 20 years later, World Series champions 5 times in a row. They've won 24 games as of the last passage. So it's quite a remarkable story. But Brad's got an audience question for you.
Yeah, we do. We've got 2, Darryl, and I'll start with the one that's just latest come in because I was talking to this man tonight at our school rugby training. Troy O'Kane is helping coach the Avalon She-Wolves Premier Women's team. Is there any strategy that would work better in the women's game than with men's rugby?
Probably, yeah. I mean, it's funny because I've been doing a lot of Zooms lately with coaches, and I had a question. If you're training, I guess there's a couple of things you want in all your trainings. You want decision making, and you want them to be getting fitter while they're doing it. So if you go with those 2 principles, you can't go wrong. But with the woman, one of the women's coaches asked me something about that, and I says, but to get the woman to shape, you might need to sequence a few things first. So you might sort of say, hey, we've got 2 sequence phases or 3 sequence phases, and then they play, then they make the decision. So what it does is it gets them into the shape of rugby, if that makes sense. So if I think back to when I was coaching the Black Ferns, so right at the start, when I first started coaching, we sequenced quite a lot because we were getting players straight from club rugby, and they didn't know how to get full field spread and multi-phase the game. And probably back in those days, we were the only team that was multi-phasing, build up a whole lot of phases and then score. So, we do things like if 12 carries, then the next 7 goes to that ruck, 8 might go to that ruck, then you've got someone coming around, you identify the carry and all that. So everything's pretty scripted for at least 3 phases. And then you have everybody, in their field spread, if you like. It's pretty much the same as what a lot of teams do when they talk about mapping. they map their game. But as I say, with the women, it's more, I think you have to be more specific. You have to script them more so they actually understand this is what an open side does. This is what a number 8 does, etc., etc. And that's just as they're learning the game. So the thing you're going to get with the women's game is you'll have Black Ferns playing with people that are in their first year of the game. And I think if those that are in their first year of the game, if they can understand, I know what my purpose is now, then the longer you have them, that's when they start to, their vision starts to grow.
That's fantastic, Darryl, and no doubt Troy will enjoy that advice. And we've got one more question on the comments feed. It's from a regular viewer of our show. Do you think we'll ever see the Black Ferns, or the All Blacks, play a curtain raiser for the Black Ferns, i.e. the women play the 7:30 game?
I think it's possible. I think you could one day see the England team doing a curtain raiser to the Black Ferns. Because what they do up in England there is the men play first and the women come on after.
Oh, wow.
And I think, as I understand, it was a strategy there to get more people to watch the women's game. So while they're all there watching a test match between the All Blacks and England, then the game after it could be the England woman versus the Black Ferns. So it's not a curtain raiser as such, but it's actually, I'm not 100% sure, but I think it was a few years ago where the Black Ferns did play at Twickenham. I think they might have played after an England game. So, yeah, it is possible, I think.
It was a bad day, Darryl. The Black Ferns lost, the All Blacks lost, and I reckon the only day worse was September 3, 1949, when the All Blacks lost 2 tests on the same day in 2 different continents. They lost to the Wallabies in Sydney and they lost to the Springboks in South Africa. I wanted to ask you about the challenges ahead for the women's game. We've presented a very favourable version of the women's game and what some of the fantastic things that have been achieved, but what are the real challenges out there growing, and especially after the COVID-19 tragedy?
Yeah, look, I think the challenges haven't really changed. It's club rugby, and it's getting clubs to really, embrace the woman at the club. So, when you see them at Black Fern level and even the Farah Palmer Cup, they're getting a lot more kudos at that level now as well. But still, clubs are really struggling to get coaches, and the full support of clubs. Probably the other thing that it really rips my nightie about the women's game is the quality of referees they get. Even at the Farah Palmer Cup, that sometimes that really, I think, they talk about equality stuff and all this sort of stuff, but they say women have to do women's games. And my thing is that, if put the best people to referee the game, and I look at the women's, how hard they work, how hard they train and all that sort of stuff. They deserve the best, not so no, I used to always sort of sing out about it, talking about the, why are these women refereeing the women's games when they're not ready for it? And you always used to get the answer, but where else are they going to get practice to get it right? I said, don't practice on the women, put them with the men's team, let them practice on the, senior club rugby or, grade there or something, not with the top women's players in the country. But, that's the thing that rips my nightie still is is some of the refereeing.
Well, Darryl, we've got
to say that about referees. So
he's one of them.
I am one of them. So go for it. I'm one of the few that can take on the advice.
He's a school teacher and a referee. He combines 2 of the worst aspects of society.
Well, Darryl, thank you very much for coming on the Huddy Hui tonight. A fantastic story about women's rugby and also your amazing achievements with the Black Ferns. We wish you all the best this year, and hopefully we'll see some games of rugby on the field, no doubt, and hopefully some test matches maybe.
Yeah, that'd be good. Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks for having us on, and all the best, eh?
Yeah. Cheers, Darryl. Thank you very much.
See you later, mate.
See ya.
Well, Darryl Suasua really is one of the most extraordinary rugby personalities that I've come across in my time in the game, and I was lucky enough to be a friend of Jonah Lomu's, and I've interviewed countless All Blacks and even British Lions, but Darryl Suasua is the real deal. He took this thing of women's rugby, which was a novelty, and established a formidable record, 23 wins and 24 internationals, 1 try conceded and 2 World Cup wins. And not only that, but he gave it a dignity and a talent and an enduring respect, which might help explain why the Women's Rugby Wharepama Cup in 2020 survived at the expense of the Heartland Championship. I'm a huge fan of the Heartland Championship.
Yeah,
I'm
too.
absolutely gutted that the Heartland Championship no longer exists, but I wanted to provide some context into why the women have survived. And you can see one of the reasons they have been so successful is because of an innovator like Darryl Suasua. He's always been a bit of an outsider, and he's come in to the game when really it was in a perilous state. He's built something with a whole wall of exceptional women, and now they are a part of the fabric, whether grumpy men at the bar like it or not.
Exactly right, Adam. And women's rugby over the last few years has had great success. Of course, they won the World Cup a few years ago, beating England there in Ireland. And of course, such players as Salika Winiata, of course, has taken out the whistle recently too. So, but Adam, your involvement with Darryl Suasua, okay, is only just recently in the last 8 months, is because you took on a role with New Zealand Rugby to profile people involved, all the players that had played for the Black Ferns. And part of the thing was that there was no real records of them. You know, of course, we have the Men in Black that profiles all the All Blacks that have played previously. You took on this massive task of actually not only just ringing former players, but going to meet them. And of course, you spent a few days with Darryl Suasua, and that is the reason why he was our guest on the Huddy Hui tonight, because his story, he could have gone on a lot longer tonight.
Well, his story is a rugby story. And the other thing that's extraordinary about Darryl Suasua, after winning that World Cup in 2002, instead of carrying on longer than Alex Ferguson, which he could have done because he was the main guy, he retired, reconvened with the women's game later on with Counties Manukau and in official capacities with the rugby union. And then he coached Manu Samoa and lifted them to 7th in the world. They scored a couple of stirring victories over Northern Hemisphere opponents. My interest in the women's game emanated from its growing status within society. And I was genuinely intrigued as to why they had endured despite the grumbles of a lot of people. And what I learned was it's not just an example of tokenism, but in actual fact, these are highly successful, ambitious women who don't necessarily want to be paid as much as the blokes, because the blokes attract more financial revenue, the blokes attract more audience. They're not saying that. All they wanted was some dignity. And when they're being given hand-me-down jerseys from males teams that have been worn prior to the games, that's really not a satisfactory situation. And I think the story of women's rugby in New Zealand is a story of originality, stubbornness, and brilliance. Quite frankly, Darryl Suasua's tale is one that has earned him a lot of respect, not only in the rugby scene for women, but in Auckland society. His wife, who also was a Black Fern evidently, Davida White, is the headmaster of Tangaroa College. Wharepama, who wasn't even mentioned by Darryl, captained 3 World Cup wins and is one of the most successful New Zealanders, first woman on the New Zealand rugby ball.
That's right.
Lewis Wall passed the same-sex marriage legislation, which is a major piece of legislation in New Zealand for that particular rights group, Brad. I'm not looking at you funny. And the whole thing with the women's rugby is that it is here to stay, and it should be embraced alongside the male game, and it can be catered for because they're successful and they ain't going anywhere.
Well, one of the best games we commentated last year, Adam, was the women's final on Wellington Finals Day between Oriental Rongotai and Northern United. And what a game that was.
Well, exactly. And when I say the women's game is here to stay, that's not necessarily something I would have said 5 years ago.
No,
I didn't know
this
story. It's an incredible story of success and perseverance. and fighting the establishment, which are things that I personally enjoy, and I think are things that are universally enjoyed by a lot of people. That Ori's Norths game last year was sensational. Aisha Letiainga, the Black Ferns winger, scored a hat-trick and was the player of the final, and she scored 110 tries in 50 games for her club. And I encourage anyone, if they get the opportunity, to watch this diminutive, fast, robust winger play, watch Aisha Letiainga.
No doubt, and next weekend you'll be able to see her and any other woman playing in their competition starting next week alongside Premier Club Rugby, which is a few pre-season games which we're going to look at very soon. But, of course, what's starting this weekend is Super Rugby Aotearoa, Adam. Of course, first, there was going to be no one in the crowd, and then Dr. Bloomfield and the Prime Minister decided we'll go to level 1, and anyone can go. And we've got some interesting games coming up. In particular, the one I was sort of looking forward to is going to be the battle of the brothers between Geordie and Bowden, the Hurricanes and the Blues. But unfortunately, Geordie Barrett's out injured.
I hope it's not Dr. Shipman in the crowd like he was at the NRL.
Oh,
the
yes.
Blues versus the Hurricanes, who can hardly wait for this. Adi Savia, Bowden Barrett, and Daniel Carter, 3 of the best players of their generation, on display at Eden Park. It's only $20, I understand, for adults to attend, children for free. The challenge in Auckland should be to sell out that stadium and prove to the world that we're over the worst of this horrible virus. The last time these two teams met, the Hurricanes started at the Westpac Stadium, ended at the Basin Reserve. They had 12 players, lost by 24-15. Let's hope the Hurricanes can improve their discipline. They had a monumental win against the Chiefs before the lockdown. But how will the new turnover rules affect Duplessis, Karifi, and Gareth Evans, who are such an influential part of our back row? And how will the lockdown rules emanate in the back line? It's going to be interesting if the game is quicker, seeing the likes of Ben Lamb and Nani Lamapi in more space. The Blues would love to see Rico Ioane in more space. Tom Robinson, though, that battler of a flanker, might be contained with his aggression. The Blues, 4 wins in a row, including a victory against the Hurricanes before the lockdown. Eden Park, big crowd, momentum. It might be a tough one, this one, for the Hurricanes, dare I say it. But this rivalry, Brad, is one of the greats in Super Rugby history. The Hurricanes have had 2 more wins overall, but the Blues, on average, score a single point more game. And, of course, they contested the very first game of Super Rugby in 1996. So how apt they feature in the first weekend of Super Rugby Aotearoa. But, of course, that's not the first fixture, Brad.
No, it's certainly not. We have got the Chiefs versus the Highlanders down there at Forsyth Bar in Dunedin. They are expecting a big crowd down there too. Of course, students are back, so they might be able to get a few there. But we're speaking about the role of the flankers, Adam, and the first part of Super Rugby this year. The Chiefs, number 6, Lachlan Boshier, was having an outstanding season. People were talking about him as being an All Black bolter. We were talking earlier in the week that with these new breakdown interpretations, and we just mentioned it before of the Hurricanes and Tom Robinson, that could have a massive effect on this young man who was showing great promise.
Well, he was the leading turnover merchant in Super Rugby. So if it's more difficult to extract a turnover with new rules, obviously that eliminates a big source of his game. But Lachlan has added other components to his game. He scored 3 tries prior to the lockdown. He's an athletic and quick runner. He's good in the lineouts. And he was telling me this week, when I had the good fortune of speaking to him for Club Rugby, he played most of his career through the age groups as a 7, and he's a very good open side. New Zealand Secondary Schools 2012, New Zealand Under-20s 2014. He was picked up by the Chiefs as an injury replacement in 2016, and he found himself competing against Sam Cane. So obviously he's not going to get in the team when the All Black captain occupies that jersey. But ironically, the pair lived together during the lockdown. So Lachlan, who had improved out of sight at the beginning of 2020, has observed Sam Cane, one of our mighty talents, by living with him. So he might come back an even more formidable player. And the other clue that possibly suggests that the stars are aligning for Lachlan Boshier is the fact that he's a product of New Plymouth Boys High School, which is the old stomping ground of Graham Murray and Sir John Graham, two of our great loose forwards, and he's a dairy farmer.
That's right, dairy farmers. Nothing wrong with farmers, Adam, is there? There's nothing wrong with it at all. They're the backbone of New Zealand society, as for Wellington bureaucrats. But the Chiefs should be too good for the Highlanders. As we know, the Highlanders were struggling in the original Super Rugby. They'd been pummeled in South Africa. And then, of course, they get their game in Argentina didn't happen. And then they had to go into a lockdown earlier than most. But even though they have signed Nihi Milner-Skudder, the Highlanders, it's going to be hard for them.
Well, the Chiefs forwards have a very imposing look about them with Boshier, Kane. Peter Solkula, the number 8, was in rampaging form before the lockdown. But if these rules are to have a really pronounced effect in accelerating the speed of the game, the Highlanders' prospects are greatly enhanced. Aaron Smith and Josh Ioane in the halves. That's an All Black standard 9-10 pairing. And then Nihi Milner-Skudder is back on the wing. And Tony Brown is the coach. And remember, Tony Brown's coaching in the World Cup with Japan.
That's right.
Opposed against oversized, over-accomplished forward packs. And what did Japan manage to do? They knocked over Scotland and Ireland, and I think produced the best first half of the entire tournament when they held the eventual champion South Africa to 5-3. If the All Blacks had played the first half of the quarterfinal like Japan did against South Africa, the All Blacks would have won by 50.
Oh, they would have. Easy. They would have won easy. So, no doubt, referee interpretations are going to be under scrutiny this weekend. And no doubt, hopefully, we do see some entertaining rugby. Of course, the Crusaders don't play this weekend. They play next Sunday at Sky Stadium against the Hurricanes, which will be even more of an entertaining game. But, of course, we have pre-season Wellington Club Rugby. Of course, Adam and I have been sick of being stuck in our homes and having to watch Sky Sport highlights of Super Rugby from 1996, etc. And we're looking forward just to get out there. And so Huddy Sports is going on the road on Saturday. We're going to start at the top of the Hutt Valley and finish in Wellington. And, of course, there are some massive games coming up this weekend. Of course, at Evans Bay Park, there is a big day. Marist St. Pat's having a big club day there. Of course, their Prems are playing Porniki. That will be very interesting. A lot of talk before the lockdown about Marist St. Pat's, looking like they've rebuilt. They won the Hardham Cup last year after that disappointing Jubilee. They certainly, Adam, will be a team to watch out for.
Well, it's their 50th anniversary, so there's plenty of motivation for Marist St. Pat's 14-time Jubilee Cup winners and one of the great Wellington and New Zealand rugby clubs to celebrate that milestone with the kind of performance that their fans expect. Young Tom Martin, the lock forward, is back from Hamilton. He was outstanding for Waikato in the National Under-19s last year. And Marist St. Pat's always put together a quality backline. Will Fatonu Fili survive for another year?
Well, who knows? People always say he retires, but he always comes back. He's a legend.
He retired more often than Conor McGregor in the lockdown.
Exactly right. Of course, Wellington playing Parramatta Plympton out there at Haitaitai Park, which will be a good gauge for both those sides. And, of course, Petone play OBU, which for Petone will be very interesting because they've had a pretty good recruitment over the off-season. And, of course, OBU. They had a slight hiccup last year, but they always managed to get the good players coming through into their club system.
Well, on the subject of milestones, the Wellington Football Club celebrate their 150th anniversary this year, the oldest rugby club in Wellington and arguably the oldest rugby club in New Zealand. They actually played a pre-season match against Nelson, who were also 150 years old, and they were very competitive in that game, Wellington, but they narrowly lost by 32-21. But they showed a lot of heart and promise, and their tussle with Parramatta Plympton will be very enjoyable. Of course, one of the highlights of the relationship between Parramatta Plympton and Wellington is the fact that the teams honoured Daniel Baldwin, who was that young champion tragically killed in an incident 2 years ago in the game when he had a head knock and suffered the awful consequences of concussion. And so Parramatta, Plympton and Wellington share a special relationship anytime they play. But Tony against Old Boys University, 3-time winners in the last 5 years, missed the Jubilee Cup last year, but actually won the same number of games as the Champions North. So they will be sniffing on the door of the top 4 again, no doubt. But Tony have been big movers in the off-season. They picked up Josh Houston, Tupou, Josh Southall and Yona Apaneru from Upper Hutt. Ridgestad is a very promising young flanker and hooker from Wellington College. And Batoni, for the past few seasons, have had a very good backline. Piri Peroni, Jared Adams, the captain out there, and Willie Fine are all back. So if Batoni can get together a really good forward pack, and they had that fantastic lock in Sturridge last year.
That's right. Yeah.
Expect them to be really competitive.
Oh yes, and definitely right. But Tony definitely up there for the contenders to possibly be within the top 4 for the Jubilee Cup, because as we know the structure is different this year. And of course, the other preseason games around is Avalon versus Wainui. Of course, Wainui Jubilee Cup finalists last year. It'll be interesting to see how Wainui go. And of course, Oriental Rongotai are playing Tawa in a pre-season. But will we see Oriental Rongotai play certain All Blacks in this club rugby season? Because if those All Blacks play, it changes the game, doesn't it? And stakes are higher for winning.
Julian Severe and Ma'anonu loitering about Wellington, I understand. What if they played club rugby for Auries? That would be sensational. And Auries Tawa was one of the very best games we commentated last year. Stephen Butler scored a hat-trick out at Lyndhurst Park, and Auries scored a surprise 32-27 victory. Tawa, a very strong club. What a credit Hugo Plummer is to that club. We had him on this program last week, and Tawa have a lot of experience in their forwards, the likes of James Coburn coming back, and in the back line, Pepesana Patafilo has been a mainstay of their midfield for a number of years now. So really looking forward to that game between Oriental Rongotai and Tawa. Wainui Amata, I say it every season, so I'm going to say it again. You're too old. You won't win the Jubilee Cup, which means we'll prove me wrong.
They'll probably be in the final again.
Matt Jacobs, Justin Butter, Teru Time, please come back. We love your company. We love your excitement, and we love your talent.
Well, and there will be certainly interesting pre-season games, and we will be looking forward to seeing what teams look like, particularly having only a few weeks of pre-season training to get themselves ready. But we are waiting desperately for club rugby. And of course, when it gets going, we're going to see some interesting things. But noticeably, Adam, we haven't seen Upper Hutt on there, and Upper Hutt's had a bit of a tricky time during the lockdown period.
I was hoping you wouldn't ask me about that.
No, of course.
Upper Hutt have had a very turbulent off-season. There's been a mass exodus of players from the club. There's a financial situation which is difficult. I understand that a new committee has been formed, chaired by the Mayor, Wayne Guppy, to resolve things.
He chairs everything
the
up
club.
Hutt, doesn't he?
He certainly does. But he's a very honourable man, and he's a very proud Upper Hutt rugby man. Many years of association with that club, many good people involved with Upper Hutt. So let's hope that those who are alleged to have partaken in illicit activity are held to account, named, shamed and embarrassed. Disgraceful if this missing money is true. And let's hope that Upper Hutt can rebuild their internal workings and cooperate and produce a competitive team, because Upper Hutt is a big part of the Swindale Shield and Jubilee Cup. It covers a huge section of Wellington, and being only half an hour from the Wairarapa, it can attract players from that part of the world too. Troubling times at Upper Hutt, but hopefully we can have an honest conversation about what's going on and look to move forward.
Exactly right. And we've always had great hospitality when we've gone to Upper Hutt, Adam, and has one of the great grounds in Wellington Rugby, Maidstone Park. Great to commentate from, looking straight over the ground. Of course, it's just had a big makeover in the last year or so. So fingers crossed, Upper Hutt get back on the right foot, because it's a great place to go and watch rugby and they are great people out there too. And of course, Johnsonville, Adam, what are we expecting from Johnsonville this year? Of course, new coach out there. What have you heard about Johnsonville Rugby Club?
Well, Johnsonville have had a terrible 2019 season, 20 losses in a row. They're unbeaten after 2 months. That's encouraging enough. In all seriousness, I hope Johnsonville can assemble a competitive team. I do worry that some teams who were already struggling post-COVID with all the economic misery and change in circumstances will struggle to field a competitive side. But one of the most heartening things I've ever seen in rugby was when they had a fundraiser 2 years ago for a young lad, Amon Carr, who was tragically diagnosed with cancer. He's in remission now and I understand ready to take the field shortly, but they had a huge quiz and fundraiser and meal for him at the 1841 bar and raised $17,500. And when you see things like that, it suggests that there is a strong passion and will for success. So hopefully Johnsonville can replicate that kind of sentiment in their play this year.
We did pretty well in that quiz, didn't we? There's only two of us. We won't tell you the team name, but it was great fun. And of course, there's one more preseason game. I just almost forgot about it. And of course, these two should be up there come towards the end of the season for finals rugby is Northern United and Huddy Boys Marist out there at Pairua Park. Of course, Northern United prior to the lockdown had recruited very well. And of course, Huddy Boys Marist very much always been a consistent premier side.
The Swindale Shield champions against the Jubilee Cup champions. Huddy Boys Marist 10-0 last year in the Swindale Shield. Missed the semi-finals by virtue of a contentious decision at William Jones Park. Huddy Boys Marist, very strong forward pack, although they have lost Nis Solia to Norse. Malachi Unasa has also headed across to Norse from Auries, but Huddy Boys Marist have the likes of Jordan Gillies and Jack McCormick back, and in their back line, they've got a lot of experience now with Brandon Lawson and Glenn Walters, who are classy Heartland Championship players. Norse looking very strong. Jackson Garden Bishop not in favour so much with the Hurricanes at the moment. He might have a run later in the season. And alongside Luca Reese and Fafili Lavave, who's coming back, and Lossie Filippo, who's a Wellington line, and Campbell Woodmass, who was such a revelation last year. Norse assembling a very strong team in their attempt to defend the Jubilee Cup.
Who would you think will take out the Swindale Shield and lead into the Jubilee this year? Because it's a different sort of scenario we're in. Who would you make a prediction now at the end of the Swindale Shield? Who will win it?
Up the Hawks.
Up the Hawks. Here we go. Jayville. Come on, Jayville. You can do it. Right, Adam, and of course, that's the end of our lockdown series. Of course, level 4. It's and also hand sanitizer. But of course, we're going to finish off tonight's episode with the best lockdown key moments, and of course, a very special award.
Well, that's right, Brad. Obviously, New Zealand has been through a very tough time, and the return of our freedoms is fantastic. We can ill afford to be complacent. We can ill afford to not listen to the advice of assured professionals and experts like Ashley Bloomfield. But one of the things that did emerge during the lockdown was the complete and sometimes insanity of the human race. And so I decided during the lockdown to assemble a file called COVID Classics. And these were the most amusing, absurd, and ridiculous columns that were written on the World Wide Web about COVID-19. And I've decided to present an award tonight to a Stuff editorial writer who, on April 10, headlined a piece, Why the Government Needs to Ban Power Tools and Loud DIY During the Lockdown. This author suggested that power tools, loud music, and DIY are non-essential services. They are unessential to the survival of the human race, unessential to the entertainment of the human race. The government should come in and ban power tools. So I've gone through the Huddy Hui contract tracing, and I've decided to present a special award to the writer of why the government needs to ban power tools. Here it is. Freedom reign, level 1. Well done.
And also with this power drill, let's have a look at it here, because it's not as much as we are environmentally friendly. There's no cords. It's not going to... It's lithium battery, 18 volt. There we go. Look at that. Look at it go. It's nice and clean for the environment. There we go. But that is the Huddy Hui episode 8 tonight. We had Darryl Suasua, what an amazing individual, and no doubt has built and will continue the pride in which women's rugby is growing across New Zealand. Adam, thank you very much as always. Do we need to talk about our guest for next week or not?
Yes, we've got a very special guest next week. Those of you who are familiar with farming and rugby will recognise Hugh Renton, who is a young former Hurricane who has been raising awareness and money and a conversation about depression and suicide and difficulties in rugby and the farming world. So Hugh Renton, very special young man from the Hawke's Bay area, will talk to us about that on next week's Huddy Hui.
Yes, Huddy Hui. We will be back next Wednesday, 8 o'clock. Adam? One last sanitizer. Thank you all for joining the show tonight. We will see you next Wednesday. Ciao for now.